Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanand. Hari Hari Gaur. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
You able to share, Prabhu, or would you like me to share?
I can. Let's see.
Okay, I've made you co-host.
Should be this one. Yeah. How's that?
Yeah, so we have two screens, two windows.
Oh, do you have, yeah, you have my notes too? Let's see if I can just do that window.
I can share it if you like.
Should just be this one. How's that? Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Somehow tech isn't my strong suit, but here we have it. Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our continuation of Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are in the third canto, 7th chapter. Today's verse is number 37. But before we begin, we can invoke auspiciousness by chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, so 3737. Tatvanam Bhagavam Stesham Katidha Pratishan Kramaha Tatremam Ka Upashiran Ka Usvid Anusherate Tatvanam Bhagavam Stesham Katidha Pratishan Kramaha Tatrema Ka Upashiran Ka Usvid Anusherate Tatvanam Bhagavam Stesham Katidha Prati Sankramaha Tatremam Ka Upashiran Ka Usvid Anusherate. Please check.
Tatvanam Bhagavam Stesham Katidha Pratishankrama Tatremam Ka Upashiram Ka Yusvit Anusherate.
Tatvanam Bhagavam Tesam Katida Pratisankrama Tatremam Ka Upastran Kahusvid Anusrate.
Hare Krishna. Tatvanam bhagavastesham katitha pratisankramah tatremaka upasiran ka usudanu sherate. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Tatvanam Bhagwan Tesham Patitha Pratisankramaha Tatremam Ka Upashiran Ka Susuido Anusherate. Hare Krishna.
Tattvanam, of the elements of nature. Bhagavan, O great sage. Tesham, of them. Katidha, how many. Pratisankramaha, disillusions. Tatra, thereupon. Imam, unto the Supreme Lord. Okay. Who are they? Upashiran, being saved. Okay. Who are they? Who? Svit, may. Anusherate, serve the Lord while he sleeps. Translation by Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Please describe how many dissolutions there are for the elements of material nature, and who survives after the dissolutions to serve the Lord while he is asleep. Purport. In the Brahma Samhita 5:47 and 48, it is said that all the material manifestations with innumerable universes appear and disappear with the breathing of Mahavishnu lying in Yoga Nidra, or mystic sleep. Yakarana Navajale Bhajati Smayoga Nidram Ananta Jagad Andra Saromakupaha Adhara Shaktim Avalambya Param Svamurtim Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nishvasita Kalam Ata Valambya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagat Andapnataha Vishnur Mahansa Iha Yasya Kala Vishesho Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Govinda, the ultimate and supreme personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, lies sleeping unlimitedly on the causal ocean in order to create unlimited numbers of universes during that sleep. He lies on the water by his own internal potency, and I worship that original supreme Godhead. Due to his breathing, innumerable universes come into existence, and when he withdraws his breath, there occurs the dissolution of all the lords of the universes. That plenary portion of the Supreme Lord is called Mahavishnu, and he is a part of the part of Lord Krishna. I worship Govinda, the original Lord. End quote. After the dissolution of the material manifestations, the Lord and his kingdom beyond the causal ocean do not disappear, nor do the inhabitants, the Lord's associates. The associates of the Lord are far more numerous than the living entities who have forgotten the Lord due to material association. The impersonalists' explanation of the word aham in the 4 verses of the original Bhagavatam, aham eva sam eva agre, and so on, is refuted here. The Lord and his eternal associates remain after the dissolution. Vidura's inquiry about such persons is a clear indication of the existence of all the paraphernalia of the Lord. This is also confirmed in the Kashi Khanda, as quoted by both Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, who follow in the footsteps of Srila Sridhar Swami. Nachavante hi yad bhakta mahatyam pralaya padi ato chuto kile loke saeka sarvago vyayaha.  . The devotees of the Lord, . 。 The devotees of the Lord, . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . never annihilate their individual existences, not even after the dissolution of the entire cosmic manifestation. The Lord and the devotees who associate with him are always eternal in both material and spiritual worlds. Translation again. Please describe how many dissolutions there are for the elements of material nature, and who survives after the dissolutions to serve, who survives after the dissolutions to serve the Lord while he sleeps. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavari Paschati Deshatarane Om Ajnana Timirandasya Rananjana Shalakaya Chakshuramilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So sometimes it's nice to get a little context. When we've been studying sections for a long time, it's hard to remember what conversation's going on, because Srimad Bhagavatam is conversation within a conversation within a conversation. And oftentimes it's even a few more sub conversations that are occurring. And so sometimes we can get a little bit lost, and sometimes we can wonder, okay, how did we get here, and what does this have to do with me? So we're gonna provide a little bit of context today, and then we're also going to show what all of this has to do with us, how we are to apply this in our lives. So currently, and for a while now, and also for a long time to come in the future, we have been and will be hearing a conversation between Vidura and Maitreya. Now, this conversation is an expansion of the 4 verses spoken by Lord Krishna to Lord Brahma, which was mentioned in today's purport, the 4 original Bhagavatam verses. So this conversation between Vidura and Maitreya is then spoken by Srila Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit, who has 7 days left to live, and he wanted to spend that time wisely by hearing Harikatha from an authorized devotee in the association of many saintly devotees. And then that conversation between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit is being repeated by Srila Sutta Goswami to the sages who are assembled at Naimisharanya. And then, of course, on top of that conversation, we have the absolute priceless fortune of having A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's merciful commentary, which is based on the commentaries, as mentioned in today's purport, of many authorized acharyas, beginning with Sridhar Swami, and including Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Those were mentioned today, but so many other commentators, authorized acharya commentators. We are reaping the benefit of all of those commentaries by the mercy of our Srila Prabhupada. So we are also now hearing this conversation. So we're also part of this conversation. Srila Prabhupada is the speaker explaining all of these previous conversations, and we are the listeners, right? And so Srila Prabhupada is presenting this intact. He's citing the acharyas, and he's focusing on the principle of devotion, which is what all of these speakers that we just mentioned are focusing on, from Krishna himself to Lord Brahma, and so on. So the principle is the important thing when delivering, when talking, when hearing, when reading Shastra, to understand what the principle is, right? And so the principle is what we have to pay close attention to, because otherwise, sometimes we get lost in the details, we get distracted by life, and we wonder why it is that we've been practicing Krishna consciousness for a very long time, but haven't made as much progress as we've expected to, right? So if we pay close attention to how these conversations are going, what the principle is throughout that conversation between the speaker and the listeners, and if we can understand that we have an authorized speaker explaining this to us, and if we can become authorized listeners, recipients of that knowledge, then the process of Krishna consciousness goes much more smoothly, right? So first we're going to talk about we'll talk about the principle. So each of these conversations is based on a need to understand who we are, who Krishna is, what the relationship is between us and Krishna, how to act appropriately according to that relationship, and then what the ultimate goal of life is, right? So all of these conversations are based on that. So we'll break them down. We'll go one by one. So Lord Brahma, right? Lord Brahma wakes up in his lotus seat and he doesn't know what to do. He understands somehow that it's his service to create, but he doesn't know how, right? He crawls down the lotus stem, he goes for a little swim, and he's perplexed. He doesn't know what to do, right? So Krishna, understanding his perplexity and understanding his desire to know what to do, gives him a hint. An unembodied sound or a group of syllables comes and it says tapa, right? So tapa means austerity. He understands, okay, I have to perform some penances and then I can understand how I'm to accomplish my service, right? My duty. So Lord Brahma, he performs his penance, and then he attains the darshan of Lord Vishnu, right? He actually sees Lord Vishnu. Lord Vishnu even shakes his hand, and he receives the Chatur Shloki, the 4 verses, the 4 seed verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It has the essence of Bhagavatam, right? And those verses let Lord Brahma know that the Supreme Lord, Lord Vishnu, is the source of everything, right? So he understands his transcendental position that everything comes from him, spiritual and material. He also understands from those verses his own position as a servant of the Supreme Lord. He also understands how to perform his service while distinguishing reality from illusion, right? To understand that if something doesn't have a relation to Krishna, it's illusion. Means everything has a relation to Krishna by its own nature. But when one doesn't see that connection, that means one is in illusion. So whenever we're not seeing a connection to Krishna, this means that we are in illusion. It's Krishna, everything is part of Krishna. And finally, he understands from these verses what one must do in general to dispel one's illusions and experience that reality, right? So not only to understand that if we're seeing things not in connection to Krishna, it's illusion, but also how to dispel that illusion, how to actually see things properly. So we see that in Brahma's case, first he was confused. He had sincerity to do the right thing. He received some unseen guidance, right? The unembodied, I want to say voice, but it was really just sounds, these 2 syllables that impelled him to perform the penance. Then he did the penance. And then he got direct instruction from an authority regarding transcendental knowledge. So this was the principle of how Lord Brahma received that instruction. Then the sages of Naimisharanya. So they're performing this very elaborate fire sacrifice, very long, very elaborate fire sacrifice. for the benefit of humanity, because Kali Yuga is just, progressing, right? And so to try to invoke auspiciousness into the world, they wanted to do their duty as sages and perform these sacrifices to try to benefit all of society. But they understood that without pleasing Yajna, capital Y, meaning Lord Vishnu, one of his names is Yajna, because he's the Lord of all sacrifices. So without pleasing him, there cannot be any success in any sacrifice that one performs, right? And then we also learned this lesson from the past time where the Yagnik Brahmanas were approached by the cowherd boys to give Krishna and his friends just some food, and they declined that request. And then later, of course, we know that they were very much lamenting their decision, that all of their training that they've gone through, all of the sacrifices that they've performed, the penances, all of the, education that they received was all a waste, because when it came down to it, they were unable to recognize the principle of all of these things, of acquiring that knowledge, of performing those sacrifices to serve Krishna, right? So they lamented that because they understood. So the sages of Naimisharanya, they understood this as well. It doesn't matter how many sacrifices you try to perform, and it doesn't matter how perfectly you pronounce the syllables. If the Supreme Lord is not satisfied, nothing can happen. So because they understood that, they wanted to hear from Sutta Goswami, right? So that their actions would actually be in line with the principles laid out in the Shastra, and not just blindly following the details of ritual, right? They wanted to hear from an authority to make sure that the principle is actually being followed, not just some details, but the actual principle. So again, the sages of Naimisharanya, they had sincerity to do the right thing. They had a need for clarity because they didn't want to be distracted or lose focus. Then they received direct instruction from an authority regarding transcendental knowledge. So a very similar thing that happened with Lord Brahma. Then Maharaj Parikshit. So he understood that his time was severely limited, right? He had a week. So we inquired from Srila Shukadev Goswami regarding the duty of man, especially a man who was about to die. So he understood the urgency of the situation. He had the sincerity to do the right thing. He sought after a bona fide authority and received instructions regarding transcendental knowledge. Again, very similar. There's a pattern forming. As for the current dialogue where today's verse takes place, between Vidura and Maitreya. So this conversation actually started a little sooner than that, when Vidura heard from Uddhava, actually, about Lord Krishna's departure from the vision of this material world. We wouldn't say his departure from the material world, because everything is part of him, so he can't really depart from the material world, but he can depart from the vision of those who are in the material world. So when he heard about this, Vidura then, taking Uddhava's advice, went to hear instructions from Maitreya Rishi, right? So this is what Uddhava told him to do. He said, you go to him, he'll explain everything perfectly, right? So following those instructions, Vidura starts his inquiry by first he observes that everyone in this world is engaging in fruitive activities with the aim of attaining happiness, but they neither find satisfaction with what they're accumulating, nor can they mitigate their distress, right? So they can't get happiness, they can't get rid of the distress, right? So understanding that the solution to this problem, which is everybody's problem, can only be attained by coming in contact with a pure devotee who can teach the message of the Supreme Lord and the process of devotional service. Vidura requests Maitreya to narrate all aspects of the Lord's pastimes and this is what we've been going through. There's so many questions regarding these various aspects of even just the material creation, right? So all aspects of the Lord's pastimes, but including the process and the reason for the creation of this material world. Now, this, of course, is of utmost importance for us, as we've mentioned in previous classes, because currently, and unfortunately, we are more attracted to the material world than we are to Krishna, right? So it's important that we understand Krishna's connection to the material world, because at least we can see and appreciate Krishna in the things that we're automatically, spontaneously attracted to, even though our attraction isn't directly to Krishna, it's actually indirectly to Krishna. So if we're able to see that everything that we are attracted to in this material world is only attractive because of Krishna's presence in it, and then if we are made aware of how to appropriately appreciate these things that we're attached to in this world and use them favorably in Krishna's service, then our problems will be solved. So this is why these particular subjects are important for us to hear, not just the sweet pastimes of Krishna playing with his friends or dancing with his girlfriends or interacting with the older villagers, right? We like to hear about these things. They're wonderful. But since currently we're more attracted to the material world than we are to Krishna, it's very much beneficial for us to understand that everything that we actually appreciate in this material world, the only reason we appreciate it is because of Krishna's potency within all of these things. So it's just a matter of us realizing that, seeing it, and then acting accordingly. Right? So again, in this conversation between Vidura and Maitreya, Vidura, he understood the futility of fruitive actions. He had the sincere desire to do the right thing. He approached an authority and received instructions regarding transcendental knowledge, right? So same. So that's the dialogue where today's verse, and as I mentioned, several upcoming chapters is taking place. But as I mentioned earlier, we also have the benefit of yet another dialogue that's taking place. Each of us has understood, at least to some extent, to some degree, that this material world isn't where we belong, right? We may not know this to the extent, or we do not know this to the extent that Vidura knows this, but we know, at least somewhat, at least in theory, that we cannot actually be happy in this material world because it's temporary and we're eternal beings, right? So therefore, we too have been inquiring about the soul's real nature, right? And we have the benefit of Srila Prabhupada's purports, which, as mentioned, also include the commentaries of many authorized acharyas, whose sole purpose is to present the principles of Krishna consciousness without any deviation whatsoever, right? This is the parampara. No selfish motives, no changes, no adjustments, just the principle of bhakti presented, right? So again, what we have in common with these other conversations is we understand that the material world is no place for us eternal beings. We have some sincerity, desiring to do the right thing. We have approached a bona fide authority, and we are hearing or reading instructions regarding transcendental knowledge, right? So we're following this pattern, right? So for us, and what these sections mean for us, is that all of our discussions, questions, and so on should follow this principle. So it's basically a format for how we should interact with others, how we should converse. how we should inquire, right? Who are we? What is our purpose? Who is Krishna? What is our relationship with him? How do we act appropriately within that relationship? And what is the ultimate goal? That's it. If we wish to truly break free from this endless cycle of attempting to find eternal happiness in a temporary place, which is quite foolish, if we truly wish to return to our eternal, blissful, fully cognizant nature, if we actually are serious and sincere about centering our thoughts, words, and actions around Krishna's desire and pleasingly serving him, then all of our conversations should follow the principle of the various conversations that we talked about today, right? They should all be centered around Krishna. They should all be a complete understanding of what Krishna is, who Krishna is, how he interacts with others. We should understand that, yes, in our current situation, we may not have access to the highest, topmost pastimes and activities of Krishna, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand him in what we have available to us, because Krishna, everything is part of Krishna. And so if we find that we are still attracted to the mundane conversation or mundane conversations about, for example, our favorite TV shows and movies, or sports, or weather, or the latest political intrigue, then we should recognize that that's actually an anchor and it's keeping us from our true goal, right? It's not that we should become daunted or overwhelmed about it, right? If we find that, okay, I actually find more pleasure in talking about these mundane things than I do in talking about Krishna. So it's not that we should become daunted or overwhelmed by it, but we should recognize it for what it is and act accordingly, right? So understand what's going on and then figure out a plan to move forward from there. It's because performing devotional service while maintaining material attachments, it's a lot like rowing a boat with the anchor down, right? So what happens is we row and we realize that we're not really making so much progress, right? And when we realize, oh, I'm not making so much progress, it doesn't mean that we give up on rowing, right? It's not that rowing doesn't work, right? It just means that there's something else going on that's holding us back, right? So we don't stop rowing. We pull up the anchor and we continue to row, right? So intelligence must be used. Of course, it should be under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. We shouldn't just be trying to use our material intelligence to figure this out. And adjustments should be made, right? The process should never be abandoned. Don't stop rowing. Understand, okay, I've been rowing, I'm not making so much progress. What's holding me back? Identify it, fix that, make it so that's no longer holding us back, and then continue rowing. And I know, I'm very well aware actually, that material attachments are quite difficult to overcome. And the fact is that we cannot become detached from the material world by our own prowess. As long as we're misidentifying with the material body, we are certainly not powerful enough to overcome material nature. That is absolutely true. But if we surrender to Krishna and become proper recipients of his mercy, then there's no obstacle that can stop or slow our progress. And it's really that simple, right? So there's nothing to be daunted by. If we're trying and we're seeing that we're not making so much progress, we shouldn't become overwhelmed or frightened or daunted. We should just intelligently understand what is going on through the instructions of the bona fide spiritual master, understand what it is that's holding us back, and then gradually, it may not be as quick and easy as just pulling that anchor up, because sometimes there's so many anchors, but it means that we have to identify, okay, this is definitely holding me back. So let's first focus on that one, right? Okay, sure. There's like 100,000 anchors here, but let's first focus on this one. Let's get this one taken care of, then we'll move on to the next one. As long as we are following this format of these conversations, having this sincere desire to do the right thing, approaching a bona fide authority, and receiving transcendental knowledge from them, of course, applying that transcendental knowledge, then we are connected with Krishna's prowess. So nothing can hold us back from making advancement, from overcoming those obstacles. The only obstacle we have is our misidentification, right? Our misuse of free will. So instead of identifying as a servant of Krishna, which is the real ego, we're identifying as independent from Krishna, which is the false ego. And while identifying with the false ego, we're also identifying with the material mind and intelligence. And then we're also identifying with the gross material body made of earth, water, fire, and air. So that is our only obstacle, is this misidentification. But when we receive this transcendental knowledge from the authorities and we apply it appropriately, and we start to gradually become disconnected from those things that are holding us back, then the process is actually quite swift. So we are eternal parts and parcels of Sri Krishna. And we have an eternal nature of bliss and cognizance, right? Satchidananda. We have this. But on top of that eternal nature, which is our constitutional nature, on top of that, we currently also have a temporary conditioned nature, which is influenced by the three modes of material nature. So these are like two powerful entities living inside us that are engaged in this mighty struggle, trying to determine who has more influence, right? And this has been going on since time immemorial, not just in this life, in so many lives. This has been going on, this struggle. So I've told this story before, but it's worth retelling. It's an old story. There's many different versions to the story. And there's also a lot of argument as to the origin of this story. Different people are claiming, oh no, it came from here, it came from there. Doesn't matter. The version that I'm going to tell is of a Native American elder teaching his granddaughter an important moral life lesson. And it's the story of two big, powerful bears, right? There's a light bear and a dark bear. And they're engaged in this perpetual struggle. And in this struggle, sometimes the light bear seems to gain control, and other times the dark bear gets the upper hand. And so the elder's telling this story, and he reveals to his attentive and intrigued granddaughter that actually these two fighting bears exist within each and every one of us, right? So this wide-eyed child filled with curiosity and concern asks a very important question from her wise old grandfather. Grandfather, she asks with her hand on her chest, which bear will win? And after a long, solemn silence, the grandfather looks deeply into the eyes of his granddaughter and replies, the one you feed, right? So we have these two natures. Our constitutional nature is the light bear, and it is by nature more powerful, right? And then we have our conditioned nature, which is the dark bear, which is inferior in nature. But as long as we feed the conditioned nature and neglect our constitutional nature, we will perpetually remain in the cycle of perceived birth and death in this material world, where everything is temporary and insubstantial, right? So if that's what we're feeding, if that's where we're putting our time and attention in mundane subject matters, again, when Krishna was explaining to Brahma the difference between reality and illusion, it was as simple as anything that you see that is not connected to me, that is illusion. But when you can see everything that's connected to me, that's reality. That's the distinguishing factor always. Are you seeing it in connection with Krishna? If the answer is no, that's illusion. If the answer is yes, okay, then you're on the right track. So when we recognize that we are attracted and attached to mundane things, in one sense, we shouldn't worry too much because that's the inferior energy, right? The inferior bear, right? If we worry too much, it becomes counterproductive and all our attention is focused on how we're doomed or too fallen or not qualified. And we tend to give up in that situation, right? That's like realizing the anchor's down and then you just stop rowing and you throw the oars out of the boat and say, see, no matter what I try, I can't, right? So we shouldn't be too worried about it. But we also shouldn't worry too little, right? We shouldn't just brush it off thinking that since our eternal nature, right, our constitutional nature is superior or stronger than the conditioned nature, that eventually that'll just win, right? If it's the superior one, then, we're just going to win. We do have to worry enough that we gradually stop feeding that dark bear, that conditioned nature, right? And we also have to cultivate an appropriate and favorable relationship with the light bear, our constitutional nature. And if we do that, as mentioned, we will progress very swiftly in our Krishna consciousness. So in our current context, Srila Prabhupada, along with the previous acharyas behind him and our spiritual masters in front of him, are the instructors and we are the inquirers, right? So our inquiries should follow the principle of the various conversations that we mentioned today. It should be, what is our position? What is the position of the Supreme Lord? What is the relationship between us and the Supreme Lord? How do we act appropriately according to that relationship? And what is the ultimate goal of all this? And that conversation should be more important than any other conversation we are having, right? It should be our priority. And we should keep a very close eye on our progress, right? Are our conversations getting more and more centered around Krishna? Or are they staying the same? I have the same amount of material attachments, or are the material attachments growing maybe, right? So we have to pay attention to that, understand, okay, are my conversations following this format or at least getting closer to following this format than they were previously, right? We have to pay attention to that because ultimately this format of these conversations that we're reading about and the one that we're currently engaged in, ultimately it has to be the only conversation we're having. Not just that most of our conversations are like that, but it has to be the only one eventually, right? And so no matter what we find ourselves talking about, right, we should be talking about it in terms of reality as opposed to illusion, right? It means we should be talking to whatever we're talking about's connection to Krishna, right? Because that's the highest truth, distinguishing reality from illusion. We learned that at the beginning of the first canto. So we see that in today's verse, we're talking about material elements and dissolution, but we're talking about it in the context of what the Lord is doing all of that and during all of that, and who's there to serve him while he's performing this selfless task of expanding his fully spiritual form to entertain the insulting desires of the rebellious jivas who wanted to live life separately from him, right? And that's what the material world is, right? So he's doing this selfless task for our benefit, for the benefit of those who, are trying to forget him actively. So he's doing that, but we can still see that, instead of selfishly seeing that, we can see that in his terms, understanding his unconditional love for us, appreciating what extents, of course, nothing really takes any effort for him, but he is a person. So when he does something like that, there's something there. So we can appreciate that. We can actually understand what love is, what true love actually is. We have this idea of what love is, but it's always, what can my beloved, or what can me and my beloved do for each other? There's always some sort of benefit that's going on. And Krishna, his love for us is actually unconditional. No matter how rebellious we get and how much we want to forget him, He's still there waiting for us to just turn right back to him, right? And as soon as we are, he gives us these little hints. He sends either syllables, tapa, or he sends his devotees to come and give us this nice association. So whatever we're talking about, even if we are interested in sports or TVs, music, whatever, if we can at least figure out how to talk about these things in the context of Krishna and understand how whatever we're actually appreciating is just Krishna's potency in those, and then gradually we can move toward more direct understandings or more direct pastimes. Krishna, we can start really, really appreciating all of these different conversations that these sages are having, right? So it's not that we can't, like I said, it's not that we can't talk about matter or the workings of the material world. It's just that we have to talk about them in the context of who we are, who Krishna is, what our relationship is, and how to appropriately act according to that relationship. And then, of course, the ultimate goal. And this is how we truly become part of one of these exemplary conversations. And this is when we'll be able to leave our mundane conversations and their concomitant miseries completely behind. So this is the goal. Again, it's generally a gradual process, although it can happen very quickly. Generally a gradual process, and we shouldn't become overwhelmed when we see that we have very many material attachments. We absolutely should not give up. We should understand that as soon as we become proper recipients of the Lord's mercy, and that comes by surrendering to an authorized representative and applying the instructions that they impart unto us, that clarity will come, and then that strength from the Supreme Lord will help us to overcome all of the different obstacles that are holding us back, all of these anchors that are holding us back. So keep rowing, pay attention to what's holding us back, and gradually get rid of those things, detach ourselves from these things that are holding us back. Okay, we will stop here, see if there are any questions or comments. See everyone. Does anyone have anything to add?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you again for a lovely class. And I really appreciate your encouragement at the end, because it is a gradual process, and sometimes it can become a little bit frustrating, if we're doing something and then we have a setback, or we're just like, God, I just want to watch TV today, and it's just one of those days, And but you're absolutely right that we have to not be overly critical, but we have to be inward and introspective enough to see where we can identify blocks and anchors that are keeping us from getting held back. But I also think too, like what you said about sometimes we might just want to throw the oars in the water and just like it doesn't work. I think I've personally seen that happen to people where they've been like, their expectation is set so high for themselves, and they might even be comparing themselves to other devotees that either may have been on the path for a very long time, or maybe who are putting forth this idea that they're elevated, but they're not exactly where people might think they are. So they compare, and they're like, I'm never going to be there. I'm never going to do this. And, so I think what you say about just taking it slow and taking one anchor at a time and working on it is really important, so that we don't lose hope in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Dronacharya Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Nice comment, Vrindavaneshwari. Nice class. I really appreciated how you talked about these as like anchors. I think that's a good visual, because anchors, can be pulled up. It's not that it's like something you're kind of stuck, but you can kind of either cut the anchor loose, or you can pull it up, and there's some level of responsibility on yourself to do it. And I think like when we look at it like, okay, I have a responsibility here. You know, there's some things I can control, some things I can't control, but there are things that I can control, and identifying what those are. I was thinking that like in some cases, maybe you could talk about this, that sometimes our challenges are that we're just going through certain things in life. It may be according to the ashram that we're in. And it may not always be like that. Like we may have a situation where, say, we're going through family life, but you may have to kind of go through certain, um, responsibilities, obligations that we're not caught, but we're living through, that we have to go through in family life. And instead of looking at them as like, uh, these, challenges or maybe anchors, but being able to see them as like, okay, this is part of life. These are things that I have to experience and go through for my spiritual development. Um, Instead of like, um, either despising them or hating them or trying to run away from them, kind of embracing them as this is an opportunity to demonstrate, um, responsibility, um, and also be able to be Krishna conscious despite the challenges around me. Um, and I think, I mean, most of the people that we um, come in contact with, even on the Sangha, are in the Grihastha ashram. And with that comes the challenges of, employment, children, um, taking care of parents, planning a future, planning retire. Like we have all these kind of things that are there that are distractions that don't seem to be going away. But if we were in a different ashram, say we're in the Vanaprastha ashram or we're in the so um, moving through, seeing where we are, but then also looking forward to maybe we don't necessarily need to be in the Grihastha ashram forever also. Anyway, just some thoughts there.
Yeah, thanks. So the idea of the Grihastha ashram is that it can actually be quite beneficial, right? Because there's more people in the boat. That means more people can row, and that means more people can cut or pull up anchors if everyone's cooperating properly. It does, but it can also be that, you know, there may be people on the boat that are throwing down more anchors, or they jump out of the boat and they root themselves and they, pull it back. So there's so many different scenarios, but the idea is that, when we're talking about Krishna consciousness, the idea is that the family should be all cooperating, so all rowing. So it can actually make devotional life easier, even if you're, having to work and, all of these things, because every action that we do can be in the context of Krishna, right? If we have expert guidance from bona fide authorities, we can see that no matter what we're doing, we can appreciate Krishna in each of those things. So, yeah, the Grihastha ashram, it can be any ashram can be a great benefit, or it can be a great detriment, right? Vanaprastha ashram can also be a detriment if we're still if we're still desiring to interact in society, right? Because Vanaprastha means retired and in the forest. It means you're not interacting with society anymore. You're not part of the scene. You are available if people want to, come and get some advice, but you're not there. So, but if you are still in the mentality that you want to be part of this, then Vanaprastha ashram is actually going to be detrimental for you because it's not going to be helpful. So each ashram can be helpful and detrimental depending on what your situation is. So that can be said about that. So it's not that Grihastha ashram is always like super challenging or Vanaprastha is super easy. It can be one or the other. So whichever situation we are in, that's what we have to deal with, and we have to deal with it intelligently by approaching the authorities, by learning and applying. And it's on us when we have a family to try to communicate these things and try to work together. And I guess sometimes that becomes more challenging than other times. And I don't know what to say in those circumstances, but yeah, that's anyway. Did that address that part? You want to try it?
Yes, Prabhu. It's thank you. I know I rambled on there a little bit.
That's okay.
With what I was saying. Is just something that was stimulating
Understood.
in my mind. But thank you for
Sure. And then
discussing.
Mitravinda, I saw that you had your hand up also. Did you have something to add?
Hi, Krishna Carucandra Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Your answer was very complete.
Thank you.
As you said, the goal is to become or be Krishna conscious no matter what's going on, no matter the struggle. And I think there are some times when we as devotees could remember what that means, and remembering who Lord Chaitanya is, understanding compassion has many doors that we can travel to. And then if we do that, we can access, Lord Chaitanya's mercy and extend it to others. Also understanding that Krishna consciousness is not corporate mentality, not crabs in a barrel, not, making one feel less than or not included. That's all material consciousness, but we see that often. But at the same time, we're not perfect. So I do appreciate your sentiments about the ashrams, because we can become frustrated in any section of anything, but if we're being Krishna conscious, it doesn't matter. We do the struggle. When you take a vow, you take a vow or not. We have freedom, free will. But again, if we're remembering Krishna in whatever we do, then our behaviors, although imperfect, will not be magnified or put on a billboard for everyone to see. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, I guess we can then wind that up. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Thank you, Charachandra Prabhu. I know you're coming to us from Mayapur.
Yeah.
That's please pray for us in the Holy Dham that we can make spiritual advancement and continue our Sangha here. And please give our best to His Grace Ravinda Shri Prabhu and Her Grace Mother Sudamani.
Will do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarubhishcha kripasindhuvyeva patitanam pavanevyo vaishnavevyo namo namaha.